Kumlan la Black Mother, we're up to Daf Samach Chesed with Aleph. We're learning about the importance of giving tzedakah discreetly, and we have different stories, people who exemplified this idea of matan b'seisa, giving money discreetly. And the last thing we learned was if somebody refuses to give tzedakah, it's tantamount to worshiping Avodah Zarah, because the word blial, which actually means bli oil, without any responsibility, and so on. So turn it about 10 lines on top of the page of Samach Chesed. Tell them what we learned. Hamasami is eine. Somebody blinds himself, pretends to be blind. And Sava is bitle, or makes his stomach swell. Or Hamikava shukai, or Kapecha shukai. Somebody makes like his foot shrink, or that he's limping, that he can't walk. He's pretending to be one of these, to have one of these deficiencies or defects, so that people should have sympathy with him and give him tzedakah. But it's not true. He will not leave this world until eventually he will have one of these conditions that he's pretending to have. Hamakabel tzedakah, so too, somebody receives tzedakah, is on the receiving side, and he actually doesn't need tzedakah, but he just likes it, or it's easy. Safely, the end will be that he won't depart from this world until he will need tzedakah. So don't pretend, things which are not true. And you're deceiving the public. So we learned over there. We have a concept called Mesadir Lebal Chayv. Somebody has a loan debt and he can't pay, so then we sit down, we'll have the Gemara and say the Mesadir Erchin, but there's a whole system of how you work out what he has to sell and what he can keep. That's not how we learned over there. We're talking about it here also is that a person can collect tzedakah. We already had another Gemara where a person was, asset rich but cash poor. And another tonight. But if somebody does not have $200 cash, liquid, then he's entitled to tzedakah. But if he has $200, then he's not entitled to tzedakah. In fact, we had Mar Chagiga, who's considered a very bad person. Somebody has $199, you give them $1, so you can no longer give tzedakah. If they have $199, you give them $1,000, and they're perfectly entitled. But the moment they have 200, they can't. In fact, the word tzedakah, the gematria of the word tzedakah, is 199. Tzadik Dalad Kuf Hey is 199. That's when you can entitle to collect tzedakah, not anymore. So if not, as we learned over there, Ein Mechayev and Limka is Beisay. There's Klei Tesh Mishay. Let's say if a person has a person has less than $200, let's say, and he therefore he's collecting tzedakah. But if he would sell some of his furniture, he would have sufficient money. So do we force him to sell his furniture so he wouldn't have to collect tzedakah? No. Ein mechayev and Limka is Beisay. We do not force him to sell his house or his Klei Tesh Mishay or the tools or things that he uses. Everything that he needs, we don't force it to sell at all. So by time we learn that if he was accustomed to using golden kalim, we tell him, downside, use silver, use silver, use copper. In other words, you have a responsibility to sell some of your things and stop living a life of luxury so that you don't have to throw yourself on the hands of the community. The B'zrit says that loikash is not a problem. Depends, we're talking about the bed and the table, that we can tell you to sell, but we will not tell you to sell your plates and your cups, because that you're used to, and therefore you find uncomfortable to have different kinds. So Moshe said, well, I'm going to ask a question. Cups and plates. He said he wouldn't force himself because he says, I find it me. It's no mitzvah shulchanami. Why can't the people who comes to bed, comes to the table, he says, I don't feel comfortable sleeping in this kind of a bed, I need that kind of bed. We're talking about macharisha de kasper. What do we tell him to sell? Things which are so, extraneous to what his personal life. Macharisha de kasper. The two ways of understanding it. Either macharisha de kasper means literally a silver plow shaver, and it doesn't really matter if it's silver or not silver, so you can sell that. Or we're talking about some kind of a comb that they used to use to part the hair. And what does it really matter whether it's silver or not? So as long as you have the outcome that you prefer. Now, Papa says no, like kasha kan koidim sheyavle de gibu kan la'acha sheyavle gibu. When do we say that we don't force you to sell? It's talking about initially you didn't have $200 and you went to take tzedakah 100%. You're entitled to, but I'm going to force you to sell. But if, let's say, you took tzedakah when you shouldn't have, and now when we come to collect it back, you no longer can afford it. In this case, we are going to force you to sell things. That's how Rashi learns. Yeah, we're going to force to sell things. Taisha wants to know who's demanding the money from you, because there's no particular poor person that has the right to demand, give back the money, or who's demanding it from you. So Taisha says it's the bezin because we're penalizing you for your behavior. And even though I normally wouldn't do this, but this time we're penalizing you. And even though an ordinary lender, a borrower, doesn't have to sell these things, but you do, because again, you did the wrong thing. You took like a chikla you took this tzedakah when you were not entitled to. You're not entitled to. Traces Rabbein Tam has different shot. He wants to say that it's talking about when he's collecting from, let's say, things of hefker, like a chikla pay, and then we don't force him to sell. We allow him to take whatever he wants to take him. But if he takes from tzedakah, from people putting in money, then we'll say to him, first sell what you have before you or your extra things, and then we'll talk about tzedakah in the community. But not everyone. But the Rashi always doesn't hold that Rashi. When it comes to tzedakah, we never force him to sell anything that he has. According to our papa. Second one, for the next Mishnah, the same an orphan she see ima. Now we know that the father marries off his daughter from the father dies, and the siblings or the mother marries her off. It's only midrabanan. We learned all about me and everything else that she can get out of. Now, what happens if she got married? Remember, and she's entitled to a dowry. She's entitled to two things: that you have to keep on providing for her while she's still a girl, and you have to also pay her dowry. So, says the Mishnah, you say they married her off, willingly, but she's a young girl. She's a ketana, which means that she doesn't really have the capacity to understand what her rights are, and when she is meichel, her mechila, if she forgave or pardoned, means nothing because she didn't really fully understand what she was doing. The consequences, so Medaita, they married her legally or willingly, the cost for law, and they wrote that her dowry will be b'mei b'chamisha, who's only 150 zuz, but she's entitled to a lot more than that. When she grows up, she can turn to her siblings and take from their estate whatever she's entitled to. What's suitable? What is that? According to Tanakama, it's 10%. She's entitled to 10% of the entire estate for her dowry. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, she was Michael when she agreed to the 15 or the zuz, whatever it is, doesn't matter. She's a ketana. She had no idea, she was a minor. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He says there's no fixed amount of 10%. If the father already married off the first daughter, and obviously he gave her dowry, so that tells us what exactly the father is prepared to give for his daughter. So the second one, we give the exact same ratio. So he already established his mindset and what he's prepared to give for his daughter. So we're going to use that same formula for the next daughter as well. Nothing to do with 10%. The Chachamim say Pami, but they disagree with you. They say sometimes sometimes you started out poor, then became richer. He was rich and became poor. Situations change. The Gemara will later say whether we're talking about practically speaking or realistically changed or his mindset changed. El Shominas al Chasim says the state we give her. And how much do we give her? According to some, they understood give her 10%, just like the first opinion. They're not arguing the Tanakh comments. There are only two opinions here. Do we give fixed amount of 10%, or do we look at the father, what he would have done? However, others say Racham have a third opinion, and they don't say 10%. They look at all the assets that he has, and then we decide what is right to give to this girl. Says the Gemara, Amash Mosul says, Parnasa, when it comes to dowry, Parnasa's dowry, Shamin Ba'av. He said when it comes to dowry, we try to assess what the father would have given had he been alive. In other words, as the Gemara will soon say, sounds like he's holding like Rabbi Yehuda. He's ruling like Rabbi Yehuda. No, but if we think the father is a very generous person, we'll give more. If we think the father is very stingy, we'll give less. Mason asks a question. It says in the Braise, Habanos Nizoinas, the girls get their provision of their food. And misparnases, and we're understanding misparnases is not the same thing as Nizoinas. Misparnases probably means dowry. And where did they get it from? Menichse Avin, from the father's estate. After he died, they still take it from the estate. Kate said, what do you mean? We do not say ilu be a kind kachel. So we don't stand there and assess the mind of the father, what he would have given had he been alive. El Shomin al Chasim will assess the estate, the nice in law, and we give her the fixed amount of 10% or whatever it is. My lab isn't it talking about Panasa Ba? We're talking about Panasa means we're talking about the dowry. And it's clearly here we don't go into the mindset of the father. How can Shmuel rule against this opinion here? Shmuel is going to interpret it with Parnassa's Atzma. That Parnassa doesn't mean dowry. Parnassa means her provisions. Says the Gemara, Hanazainis umis paritani. Then what's repetitive? It's repetitive. Says Nazainis, which means you provide for her. Then Parnassa again, it means provide for her. My lab, achas Parnassa balva, achas Parnassa Atzma. One of them is talking about provisions for herself, and one is talking about dowry, which goes to the husband. So the Chayda, and it says clearly here, we do not assess the father's mind. We have a fixed amount. Shmuel will answer back. Why not? They're both talking about the provisions. But there's two kinds. One is talking about food and drink, and one is talking about clothing. And therefore, we're not talking about the same thing. And so therefore, we we have rules how much food you have to give. We don't care with the mind of the father. However, we did learn before, if the person is richer, these amounts that we learned in the Mishnah before, the 2 kav chitin or doubled by barley and all that, and have a kav of the lentils and the oil we learned and all that, that's only a bare minimum. But if they can afford more, they surely should give more. Time we looked in the Mishnah, but it's our Mishnah, so that's the next question. Sometimes he becomes rich, rich becomes poor. We assess the state. We don't look at the father and we give. What do you mean poor and rich? Poor means literally poor, and rich means literally rich. So what the Tanakama argues, what does he hold? The Tanakama the Tanakama say the guy, when he was rich, he gave so much for his daughter, for his first daughter. Now the second daughter became poor, he has to give the same amount, but how can he afford it? How can anybody say for a mandate that you have to give more than you can afford? Unless they don't have it. Elalav, only means only bedas. Perhaps in the beginning he was stingy. Also, later on he became generous, or the other way around. And therefore his mindset changed, and it says, that we don't care. We don't care about his mindset. We don't care about how his approach is. We just have a fixed amount that we give, and that's it. Alma, what do we see from here? We do not go after the mindset of the father. It's used to the Shmuel. It's a question of Shmuel. This is the opinion of the Chachamim. So no problem. In fact, he follows exactly Rabbi Yehuda. Now, in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, if he already established by marrying the first daughter how much he gives, then he gives the same amount to the second one, the same ratio. Says the Gemara, that's what Shmuel is doing. He's agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda. The Benema, let him just say outright, halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda, that the rule is like Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara. If he would have said the rules like Rabbi Yehuda, I would have thought dafke hisia. The case of Rabbi Yehuda is he already established, the father already established. We don't really have to delve too much into his attitude or anything else, because we have empirical evidence. He already married off one daughter, and this is what he did. The goli daita avaloyisia. But what happens if let's say that this is the oldest daughter? So we have no precedent. From our Mishnah, it would seem that Yehuda holds. In that case, let's go back to the fixed amount. How do we work out what he would give? Comes along, Shmuel says no. That even in that case, we generally know how charitable he is, how generous he is, and therefore we make up we make an assumption here. Time of the Rabbi Yehuda comes along and tells you the reason Rabbi Yehuda is not because he established, but because we generally try to work his mind. And Leishna he see, Leishna Leishna. It doesn't matter whether he married off a daughter previously, he didn't. Doesn't matter. So why does the Mishnah then say dafka if he already married with a daughter? So you have father Rabban go that we do not care what he did. The other of the Yisir, even though he already married with one daughter, and he already told us clearly what he's prepared to do. Nevertheless, we do not follow that. That's why we talk about a case where he already married with a daughter. They say in your name that you say the halacha like Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. The Rava asked of Chizah, Rav Chizah said, I wish that so all of these wonderful things is Kiddushim Mishmai, they should darshan in my name. So Rava therefore heard from Rav Chizah, he accepted what Rav Chizah said, and therefore he follows Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, is that so? Did Rabbi really say we follow Rabbi Yehuda, we assess his mind? But Tanya, we learned in another brayse, Rebbe spells out Bas and his Zainus Mina'ach, a girl who gets provided for by her brother, and they tell us Isan Chasim, we have a fixed amount up to 10% of the estate, and we don't go into the father's mind. Rabbi said, he says, Allah like Rebbe. So we see that we don't, even Rebbe himself says, we follow Rebbe says that we have fixed amounts. We don't try to understand what the father would have done in this situation. Was it like cash? It's not a problem. If he lives in our neighborhood and we're easily able to determine what he would do, then we follow his mind. If he's not from our neighborhood, so we don't really know him, and we therefore can't make any assumptions whatsoever, then we have to follow the fixed rule. And that's a default position. And Rebbe's talking about a default position when we can't really assess the person's mind. So the Gemara, that makes sense. But I once said, there's a story when Rebbe gave Echad Mishneim Asa ben Chasim. Once Rebbe gave a 12th. He gave only a 12th, 8.5% instead of 10%. Kashna Dodi here, Rebbe says 10%, and there it says only 8.5%. Elosh Mamre, you have to say. How that mean we're able to determine what the father would have given had he been alive because he lived among us. We know exactly how he behaves. Then Rebbe says, well, you can give 8.5% if that's what we assess. But if we don't know the person and we can't make an assessment, then the default position is 10%, Shmamino, and therefore proves that this is Rabba's opinion. Okay, Gufa, let's now analyze that very bright. Rebbe said, a girl who gets provided for by a brother is Noitul Isa Chasim takes 10% of the state. So it said to Rebbe, if one girl takes 10%, according to you, Michi Yeshle Esa bonus, Uben, let's say he has 10 daughters and one son, or a number of sons, the sons will get nothing because each girl takes 10%, leaves you high and dry. Does someone get anything? And the Torah says that the Yerusha goes to the son, and then you just took away the entire inheritance. He said, you misunderstood. And we have the same thing in Gemara and Adorim as well. And it's called the numbers of Rebbe. Kach ani oimer. This is what I say. Rishayna, the first girl, they tell us Isa takes 10%. That leaves, let's say, 90%. But now the second person doesn't take the same 10%. It's 10% from the 90, which leaves 81. And the next one takes 10% from 81, and so on and so forth. And it keeps on reducing in number. So you have 10 girls, you only end up taking like 66, 67%, 2/3, a little bit less. The second one, Bamesha Shaida, takes 10% of what's left from the residual. The Shlish is Bamesha Shaida, and the third one for the residual again. The Chayzer, the Cholkvashav, then he finishes off, which is going to be difficult to understand. And then after all the girls took their shares, but each girl is getting less and less and less, then they pooled together everything they got and they divided equally. So what's going on here? What are you talking about? They pooled them together. Let's say between all of them, let's say they got like 65, 63%. Then they what? They divided amongst 10 each one, only ends up 6.5%. Why is that? The title 10%. This is what they meant. If all 10 girls decide to get married at the same time, then Cholk is B'Shava. But still, we don't give them 100% because there's nothing left for the son. So we give them, if they all want to get married at the same time, so nobody has a right for more money than the next one. But each one gets, this one gets 10, that means 91, and this one gets 10 for 91, which is 82, and the next one gets 8.2, and so on. And you reduce it all up at 65, 66%. And then you take that and divide it equally, distribute equally, because they're all getting married at the same time. No one has any priority here. So, and there's nothing to do with age. So, that's where they divide equally. This supports a master in bowl and not kulum. If they all come to get married at the same time, night place they take 110%. Says the Gemara, and we couldn't understand what a master was saying. 3 girls are getting married at the same time. They all collectively only get the aggregate of 10%. They take 10% like one. That means that they all take together, they pull it together, and then each one they divide it between themselves. Says the Gemara, we learned. Habana is the girls, Bain Bagru Actually Nisu. This is the Bryce. The girls, once they become an adult, they no longer get provided for for the father's estate. Or when they get married, they're no longer provided by the father's estate. But when they're a Ktana or a Naira, between 12 and 12 and a half, they do get provided for by the father's estate. So we learned. Now, what about when it comes to dowry? Tell them what we learned. Habana is the girls, Bain Bagru, whether they became adults, actually Nisa before they got married, or Bain Nisa, or whether they got married. Actually Bagru, before they became 12 and a half, they already got married. Even the same. So they lose all their rights for getting provided for, because once they get married, the husband takes steps in, or once she's 12 and a half, it says clearly till to Bagru. Once she becomes 12 and a half, she has to fend for herself. If she get married, she fend for herself. But this Tana says, but the dowry, they don't forfeit. Even a girl 12 and a half, 14, 15, 16, whenever she gets married, she's entitled to take from the father's estate her 10%. So the dowry is always there. It's constant. Divrei Rebbe. That's the view of Rebbe. Rav Shimon Loza agrees. He says once a girl is 12 and a half, she completely removes her nexus to her parents. She has no longer any ties with the state, and therefore not only should not get provided for anymore, in fact, she also loses her right for the dowry. So either she has to get married at Tana or an Ida, but once she's already a Bagris, then she loses all her connections and all her entitlements from the estate. And the same thing is also a girl. Once she is already at 12, whatever it is, a Naira, and she got married, she also loses any future dowries. Only, okay, as we'll see. In other words, we'll see Kate said, hey, what do you mean? What happens if this girl is 12 in a month and she gets married and they decide in the Kesuvos, they write the dowry, instead of giving her the 10% that she's entitled to, they write to give her 1%. Because she's an adult already and she didn't protest, that means she concedes that that's all I'm prepared, that's all I need. In that case, it's too late. We don't give her any more. We don't supplement it with the other 9% that she didn't receive because she's 12. In our Mishnah, we're talking about a Ketana. Ketana, we said that she has a right later on to collect the rest of the dowry because her Mechila is nothing, it means nothing. But once she's over 12 years old, her Mechila means something. And if she got married and she did not take up her full entitlement, then that's it. That means that she's foregone the rest. So the Braita continues. What do they do? So what do the girls do? They're becoming 12 and a half years old. They have no chasanim out there, and they're going to lose, according to Hashem Allah, they're going to lose all their dowry. And dowry is very important in order to get married. In fact, there's a mitzvah for a father to give a dowry because we learned a while ago that you should give your sons to these women, and you should give your daughters to these men. We asked the question, how do you give your daughter to these men? What control do you have that a man should marry? So we answered, you have to make them presentable, that men should want them, make them attractive, and you have to give them a dowry. That makes them attractive. So there's a mitzvah for a father to give a dowry. But once they're 12 and a half, there's no longer a mitzvah. So what do they do? Kate and I said, so they're the first ones who were cheaters. They went out there and they went over to people and said, do you mind getting engaged to me and getting married to me, so that I can get my dowry and I'll give you a little commission for that, and then we'll divorce afterwards. That's how they got their dowries before they're 12 and a half, like getting an American green card. Nachman Huna said, Nachman said, Huna told me the halacha is actually like Rebbe, that they're entitled to the dowry even post 12 and a half years old. So Nachman, so Rabbi comes along and asks Nachman a question. It says, it says in our Mishnah, a young girl under 12 years old that her parents agreed with her, that she agreed to get married and she agreed everything that happened, and also agreed to only get a small token for dowry. The Chosla B'Meilach, they gave her a very small amount denomination. When she grows up, she can take it back. And what's the reason why? Because she was a Ketana, and the fact that she was Michael doesn't, her pardon, that doesn't mean anything. But the whole reason is the Ketana. The whole reason is because she's a Ketana. Had she been an adult when she mature and she could be Michael, then Taka Vitra, she would have been Michael. So it's clearly here that what do you call it? Once she's a Gdoila, she's Meichel on the rest, and she forfeits it. So we see if we follow Shimon Elazar, that the Rebbe says that a girl is always entitled to dowry, even when she's over 12 and a half, she's always entitled to a dowry. Now Shimon Elazar says that no, only a Begeris is no longer entitled to a dowry, and he also said that a 12-year-old girl, if she only accepted a small amount, then that's it. She's Meichel the rest of the dowry. And in our Mishnah, clearly it seems that the only one who's Meichel, that only one who cannot be Meichel is a Ketana, but once you're over 12 years old, you're Meichel, like Rosh Hashanah. So like kasha. It's not a kasha whatsoever. Why not? When does Rebbe say that a Begeris does not lose her entitlement, and so too a Naira if she only writes 1% in the dowry? Does not mean that she pardoned the other 9%. They're talking about where they protested, they objected. They said, I'm coming 12 and a half years old, but I want you to know I still want my dowry. Or when she got a Kesuvos with only 1% of the estate, she said, I want you to know that I still have a claim on the other 9%. So that's when we say the halacha is like Rebbe, that she's entitled to the full 10%. But our Mishnah is talking about she's just quiet, didn't say anything. If you're quiet, didn't say anything, so your Ketana doesn't mean anything. But if you're 12 years old and you're quiet, didn't say anything, that means you're forfeiting all your rights. So the word Hachinam, it actually makes sense. because if not, otherwise we don't make this distinction between if she protested when the Rebbe would say that's what she's entitled to, and when she didn't protest, which means she's prepared to forego it. Otherwise, we have a problem, a contradiction with your Rebbe. If not, so Kasha, the Rebbe have a problem actually for Rebbe one place and Rebbe another place. Why? The time to be learned. Rebbe says, Bas Hanizonis Achin. If you have a girl who's being fed from her brother, like tell us, Isa the Chassid. Rebbe said that a girl who gets provided for by her brother, she takes 10% of the estate. You see from here, Nizonis, as long as she's getting provided for by her brothers and she wants to get married as well. In other words, when does she get provided for by her brothers? While she's a Tana or a Naira? Once she's Begeta, she no longer gets fed from her brothers. So as long as she's getting fed from her brothers, then she's entitled to the 10%. Is Isa the Chassid. But the moment they should stop providing for her, which means like she's a Begeta, she's over 12 and a half years old, or she got married to somebody when they stopped giving her food, she's no longer entitled to the 10%. How can it be? Rebbe said before that even a 12-and-a-half-year-old girl still is entitled to dowry, even when she's not getting fed. Or a girl who got married, even though she's not getting fed, she's still entitled to the balance of a dowry. You have to make this distinction. If she protested, then she still is entitled to the rest of the dowry, no matter how old she is or not, even if she's married. But if she did not protest, then once she's married, or once, even though she's a Naira, or once she became 12 and a half years old, became an adult, then she no longer is entitled to the dowry. So you have to make that distinction. Avina said to Rabbi, Rabbi said in your name that a 12-and-a-half-year-old girl, she doesn't have to object or protest in order to maintain her entitlements. She doesn't have to protest, which is very different than what we just said a minute ago. Nisa, once she got married, still, if she's 12 years old, whatever, they only put in 1%. She doesn't automatically forego the balance. She does not have to protest. Bagra v'nisas, but only the time she does is if she was raised an adult and she got married, then and she didn't get a full dowry, then she has to protest. That's what Rava said. Says the Gemara, how can that be? We just learned a minute ago. Rava asked a question, and what do you call it? And we gave an answer. What do you call it? Rava asked a question from our Mishnah, and he was given an answer. Rava asked a Nachla question, and he was given an answer. And we basically were said was that it's a difference whether you protest or you didn't protest. And now you're coming along and saying even if you didn't protest, you still have all your entitlements. Says the Gemara. Rava say that, but we just learned before. Rava asked Nachman a question from our Mishnah. Nachman said that the halach is like Rebbe, that that even though you're an adult, you still have all your entitlements. Our Mishnah seems to say that only a Tana still has all the entitlements, but an adult doesn't. You say and how do we answer? We said it depends. That if you don't protest, then you forego the rest of your entitlements. If you protest, you object, then you're entitled to it. And now you're telling us that even if you're an adult and you say nothing, you still have your full entitlements. How does that work? It's a like kasha. If she continues getting provided for by them, so she's getting other entitlements, then when it comes to dowry, she doesn't have to object because it's automatic, it's linked together. Here, when if she no longer is getting provided for, and then if she does, so therefore, since she lost that entitlement, if she doesn't object about the entitlement of the dowry, that means she forgoes that as well. Rebbe Parnosa said that Parnosa, the dowry, does not have the same status as the addition to a ksuba. We learned before that there was a ksuba, the $200 that you give to a ksuba, and then you can add more things to it. That's called Tanai ksuba. And we learned that Tanai ksuba is kiksuba. In all respects, it has the same status as a ksuba itself. But when it comes to dowry, it does not have the same status as a ksuba. Now, in what respect, the Gemara is going to figure that out. In what respect isn't it like a tanaiksu? If you can tell me, when it comes to dowry, then tarfi mishabadi. Let's say the children, not the father, because the father, once he sells the property, you cannot collect your ksuba from there. But let's say the children sold some of the assets. When it comes to the dowry, the girl has a right to go to these purchasers and take back or collect whatever it is that she's entitled to. But however, Tanai Ksuva, when it comes to the Ksuva or the Tanai Ksuva, you cannot collect from any of the properties that the children sold. because we have that's the rule is. We made a tikkun oila because it has no fixed amount. When it comes to the dowry, we say it's like a balchoy. We have fixed amount 10%, so we know what the amount is. When you bought it, you should have known there's some daughters involved. That you should have worked out that there's enough balance, in the state of the heirs that they don't have to come and to you to seek, a supplement. But when it comes to, let's say, feeding, part of the Tanakh Surah, let's say, is feeding her. There's no limit, there's no cap. You have to continue giving her to eat as long as it is till she gets married or till she's 12 and a half. There's no fixed amount how much food you give every day. So then we made a special takana that it's not fair for the purchasers. How in the world they're going to calculate? How can they protect themselves? So says the Gemara. So Tanai Ksuba does not take Shabbat. If that's what the Chiddush of Rabbi is, my Kamash, what do we need the Chiddush for? Hamaisim b'chol yain. We can see every single day. Every day we see it. That we extract money from the children, from the heirs, for it comes to a dowry, even from properties that they themselves unsold. But the aim of seeing but we don't take away from these properties that were sold for food. Well, so what did that mean? The ilu parnasa gavia nami metalton. We already discussed before that you don't collect the ksuba metalton. The woman relied on the properties, not on metalton. It's only the goinim who later on made a special institution of takana that you can collect from metalton. So parnasa, but dowry you can collect from metalton as well. But tonight ksuba bekarka gavia only from property, from land, and metalton gavia, but not from metalton. So Gemara says, "Let it be mikveh." So that's what. What do you call it? So that's what it means. So Rebbe meant that panosa is not like Tnaik Suva, because Tnaik Suva you will not get from metaltlin, but panosa you. Says the Gemara, Rebbe, what are you talking about? Rebbe Rebbe holds clearly that panosa, dowry, and food you can collect from metaltlin. How do I know that? The Tanya, we look at Braisa. Echad lechosim sheyesh lechrayis. The echad lechosim lechrayis. Properties that have a response, that have a guarantee, that's land. Property that has no guarantee, that is considered metaltlin. Moitzian lemazon isha lebanos. We take from that, from metaltlin, for food of a woman and for the dowry of the daughter, and for the women and the daughters. So we see clearly Rebbe holds that you do take from metaltlin to sell metaltlin in order to be able to feed the wife and the daughters. So surely dowry as well. So what do you mean that panosa is not like Tnaik Suva? In which respect? My panosa is like Tnaik Suva. What did that mean when he said panosa like Tnaik Suva? Look at Tanya for the following. If a man says on his deathbed, I don't want my daughters to have any benefit from my estate, and they should be provided for, then we don't listen to a word, because when he married the woman, part of the Ksuva is that he will take care of her children and his wife. But if he says, I don't want you to give a dowry to my children, even though it's a mitzvah, but it's not like a debt that we mandate, it's a mitzvah that we say that you should help your daughters out to get married. Or if he clearly says, I don't want my daughters to have any money from our estate, we listen to him, because Parnosa is not treated like a Tnaik Suva. Says you want to tolerate Rav, who was a student of Rebbe, used to send letters to Rebbe with all kinds of shilas. And it looked like an afterthought. He had a shaila after he wrote the whole letter, so he suspended it between the lines. Between the lines, he had the expression between the lines. He put in another question. What Taisa says, he put a bunch of different letters and he stapled them together something, and between one letter and the next one, he put them in. And this is the question he asked. The discussion we just had, brothers that unsold their properties, mahu. What is it in regarding the daughters? Are they entitled to it or not? Just Reb Chia said before Rebbe, when they were reading this letter, Amalei, he said to Rebbe, when he said that the children, the heirs, did something and gave it to a third party, Mochre, we're talking about that they sold it to a third party, or Mashkene, or they just gave it as a security. Now, if they gave a security to a third party, it doesn't really belong to a third party, it still belongs to the children. Amalei might have kamina. What's the difference? The Rebbe said, I don't care whether Machri, whether the children sold it, Ben Shemashka, whether they gave it as a security. Moitziin lepanosa. When it comes to dowries, exactly what he said before. When it comes to dowry, we take away from what they ever unsold, but the aim moitziin lemazainis. We don't take from mezainis. For food, we do not take from the unsold properties, but from mezainis, we do take from the unsold. But for dowry, we do take from the unsold properties, which is what we said before. And the only reason why we said that couldn't be what Rebbe said is because ma'aseh b'chol yom. We know this for a fact every day. In fact, we have to understand why Rab would ask the question if ma'aseh b'chol yom. So obviously, ma'aseh b'chol yom was said a number of generations later, not in the times of Rab. Says the Gemara, Rav. So this is the more trying to understand. If his question was if the children unsold it, then nifle machrik, and use the word machrik. Shibud is a very generic term. They gave it to a third party, but what did they do? What kind of transaction was it? If the question was they unsold it, talk about selling. If you're talking about they gave it away security, then say the word mashkane. So Gemara says Rav Tavai Rav is asking actually both. The Savar. And he thinks, Rav, very clever, think like this. If I'm going to ask Rebbe outright, if the children unsold the property to somebody else, can we take from them the dowry? So if he tell, it would be good. If he answers me, they might see in that we do take away, then surely if he only gave a security, surely we will take from there the dowry, because that still belongs rightfully to the heirs. But if he answers me, might see it. No, when it comes to feast, they unsold it, that's it. They part of the company and you cannot collect the dowry from there. I'm still remaining with the question. I still have a question. What about a case of security? So therefore, I'll write there a case of security. If they unsold it, if they gave away a security, can you take from there the dowry for the daughter, for the sisters or not? So again, if he tells me the aim might seem you do not take the koshke, surely if you sold it, madach in the case of a security which still really belongs to the heirs, you tell me you cannot take from there back, the dowry. Then surely if they unsold it to somebody, that's it. They sever all their ties to it. But what happens if Shalach Levi tells them it's sin? Yes, you do take back from the dowry, but that I can still say that's only because they still own it. Akati machlu kamabayla. That's the question. Is echtev leidif? I will write. Rav said shibda. I write the word shibda. The mashma hachi. I'll write the word shibda because that's very generic and includes both selling and the case of security. And in both cases, the Rebbe said that for dowry we take back, but not when it comes to mizayna, special tekana. And Rabbi Yechon says, he argues with the Rebbe, his teacher, and he says, I don't care if it's this way. He's one of his teachers. I don't care if it's this way. I don't care if it's this way. We do not, even dowry, we do not take away from properties that were unsold. I'm continuing tomorrow, Mitzvah.